How the Mighty Fall and Why Some Companies Never Give In by Jim Collins. Picture this. It's 1980, and you're looking at the largest commercial bank in the entire world. Bank of America isn't just successful. It's an icon of American strength and ingenuity. Harvard Business Review is singing its praises, calling its management a notable achievement. This company seems absolutely invincible. Now imagine someone tells you that in less than 10 years, this giant will be on its knees, posting catastrophic losses, watching its stock collapse by over 80%, and forced to sell its own headquarters just to survive. You'd have laughed them out of the room, right? But that's exactly what happened. This story should send a chill down your spine, whether you're running a Fortune 500 company or just trying to ace your next semester. Here's the haunting question. How would you know if you were at the very peak of your success, but already, silently, on the path to ruin? That's the question at the heart of Jim Collins' fascinating book. For years, he studied what makes companies great. Then a darker question captured his imagination. How do they die? He and his team dove deep into the histories of 11 once great companies that fell from iconic to irrelevant, searching for a pattern. And they found one. What they discovered is that decline isn't a sudden event. It's a disease. It creeps in silently, while everything still looks healthy on the outside. And it unfolds in 5 predictable stages. Over the next few minutes, we're going to walk through that framework. This isn't just about business. It's about understanding the subtle markers of decay that appear long before the cracks show. You'll see how arrogance, undisciplined ambition, and denial can dismantle even the greatest enterprises. But here's the good news. This isn't a doom and gloom story. It's what the author calls well-founded hope. Because decline is largely self-inflicted. And if it's self-inflicted, it can be avoided. The seeds can be detected early, and as long as you don't fall all the way to the final stage, decline can be reversed. The mighty can fall, but they can also rise again. This is your roadmap for how to recognize the fall and, more importantly, how to find your way back. Ever noticed how success can change people? Think about a sports team that finally wins the championship after years of grinding. The next season, something shifts. There's a subtle move from hunger to entitlement. The intense focus that got them to the top begins to soften. They don't just expect to win, they feel they deserve to win. This is where the path to decline begins. The first step on this dangerous journey isn't complacency or laziness. It's something more insidious. Collins calls it Stage 1, Hubris Born of Success. Hubris is an ancient Greek word meaning dangerous, excessive pride, the kind that brings down heroes in old stories. In business, it's the arrogance that comes from being on top. Companies become so successful they start believing their own hype. Leaders forget the true reasons for their success, attributing it all to their own superior qualities, and forgetting the role luck or circumstance might have played. Look at Motorola in the mid-1990s. They were visionary pioneers, masters of quality and innovation. Their success was legendary. They grew from a $5 billion to a $27 billion company in just 10 years. They were on top of the world. Then hubris crept in. Motorola was about to release the StarTAC, the world's smallest cell phone, a marvel of design. There was just one problem. It used analog technology right when the world was shifting to digital. When this was pointed out, how did their leaders respond? One senior executive famously dismissed the threat by saying, 43 million analog customers can't be wrong. Think about the arrogance in that statement. It's a refusal to see the future because you're so enamored with your past. They even tried to bully partners like Bell Atlantic, demanding they carry huge quantities of Motorola phones if they wanted the hot new StarTAC. This attitude opened the door for competitors, and Motorola's market share plummeted. Their fall began right there, with the hubris born of their own magnificent success. This hubris often leads to what the author calls arrogant neglect. A company builds something wonderful, a primary engine of success, a flywheel. But then, they get bored or distracted by shiny new opportunities. They neglect the very thing that made them great, assuming its success will continue automatically. This is exactly what happened to Circuit City. In the early days, they were brilliant, creating the electronic superstore concept. But as they grew, their attention drifted. They became fascinated with new ventures like CarMax and a failed experiment called DivX. While Circuit City was chasing the next big thing, they neglected their core electronic stores. And who was watching? A hungry competitor called Best Buy. While Circuit City's attention was elsewhere, Best Buy was obsessively improving the customer experience, moving from Concept 1 to Concept 2 to Concept 3, adding features like CD listening posts and later, the Geek Squad. They kept pushing their primary flywheel, and eventually, they left Circuit City in the dust. The lesson is profound: never neglect your primary flywheel. You either exit a business definitively or renew it obsessively. You cannot let it run on autopilot. This first stage is also marked by a critical shift in thinking. Leaders start confusing the what with the why. They say, "We're successful because we do these specific things," instead of, "We're successful because we understand why we do these things and under what conditions they work." When you lose the why, you lose the ability to adapt. You become dogmatic. This destroyed A&P, the grocery giant. For decades, they were the largest retailer in the world. But after their founding leaders passed away, new management believed that taking care of the organization meant preserving old practices with religious zeal. They failed to ask why A&P had been successful in the first place. As a result, they became irrelevant to a new generation, while competitors like Kroger evolved. As one observer joked, every time a hearse went by, A&P could have said, "There goes another customer." So how do you avoid this trap? The best leaders remain students of their work. They're relentlessly inquisitive. They have an almost irrational fear that their success might just be luck, which forces them to keep improving. Think of Sam Walton, founder of Walmart. When Brazilian investors wrote to American retail leaders asking for advice, Walton was the only one who replied. He personally picked them up at the airport in his old pickup truck, and for days, bombarded them with questions, trying to learn everything he could. He was the founder of what would become the world's largest corporation, yet his primary posture was humble learning. That humility is the antidote to stage 1. But when it's lost, when a company is filled with the hubris of its own success, it sets the stage for the next, even more dangerous step. Once you believe you're so great you can do anything, what's the logical next step? You try to do everything. This is stage 2, the undisciplined pursuit of more. More scale, more growth, more ventures, more acclaim. This is where a company strays from the disciplined creativity that made it great and starts making undisciplined leaps. The author makes a surprising point here. He expected to find that companies fall because they become complacent and lazy, but that's not what the data showed. In 10 out of 11 cases, the companies weren't complacent at all. They were full of energy, making bold moves, innovating, and growing aggressively. The problem wasn't a lack of action, it was a lack of disciplined action. Overreaching, not complacency, is what brings down the mighty. Let's go back to Ames department stores. For years, they were a mirror image of Walmart. Same business model, focusing on discount retail in small towns. And for over a decade, their stock performance was just as spectacular. But then, their paths diverged. While Walmart continued its relentless, step-by-step march, Ames made an undisciplined leap. In 1988, they acquired the Zayre department store chain, more than doubling their size overnight. It was a huge, bold bet, but it was undisciplined. It thrust Ames into urban markets where they had no expertise and forced them to adopt a different pricing strategy that conflicted with their core model. The acquisition destroyed the company's momentum. Within a few years, Ames was in bankruptcy, and it eventually liquidated. Meanwhile, Walmart, the disciplined tortoise, just kept marching, eventually becoming the largest company in America. This pursuit of more can take many forms. Sometimes it's an obsession with growth for growth's sake. Look at Merck, the pharmaceutical giant. In the late 1990s, their number one stated business objective was to be a, quote, top-tier growth company. Not to create breakthrough drugs, not scientific excellence, but growth. This put immense pressure on the company to find a blockbuster. That pressure centered on a new drug called Vioxx. Merck needed Vioxx to be a massive success to meet its growth targets. The drug was launched to great fanfare and quickly generated billions in sales. But then troubling questions about cardiovascular risks began to surface. While the story is complex, the core point is this: Merck's commitment to huge growth positioned the company for a gigantic fall if anything went wrong with its big bet. When they finally had to pull Vioxx from the market, the stock plummeted, wiping out over $25 billion in market value in a single day. The greatest leaders seek growth, but they don't confuse growth with excellence. They understand that big does not equal great. Perhaps the most damaging form of undisciplined pursuit comes from breaking what the author calls Packard's Law, named after David Packard, co-founder of HP. The law states that no company can consistently grow revenues faster than its ability to get enough of the right people to implement that growth and still become a great company. If you grow too fast, you can't fill all your key seats with the right people. You start to compromise. To compensate for having the wrong people, you institute bureaucracy and rules. This bureaucracy drives away your best people because they can't stand working in a system designed for mediocrity. This leads to more bureaucracy, which drives away more of the right people, and a vicious cycle begins. A culture of disciplined excellence is slowly replaced by a culture of bureaucratic mediocrity. This is what began to happen at Bank of America during its decline. In its great years, the responsibility for a loan lay squarely on the shoulders of a single loan manager. But as the company fell, that responsibility was diffused through a complex web of about 100 loan committees, requiring as many as 15 signatures for a single decision. Who was responsible? The system. No one. This leads to the final critical marker of Stage 2, a problematic succession of power. When a legendary leader steps away, if there isn't a solid plan to transfer power to the right people, the company is set on a path to decline. We see this pattern over and over. A dominating leader fails to develop strong successors. The board makes an unwise choice, often bringing in an outsider who doesn't fit the culture. In all but one of the fallen companies studied, there were signs of problematic power succession by the end of Stage 2. And this is the sobering conclusion. While no single leader can build an enduring great company, the wrong leader vested with power can almost single-handedly bring one down. So we have a company filled with hubris from past success. It then makes undisciplined leaps in a frantic pursuit of more. What happens next? The warning signs begin to appear. The data starts to look shaky. But the external results are still strong enough to explain things away. This is Stage 3, the denial of risk and peril. In this stage, leaders discount negative data, amplify positive data, and put a positive spin on anything ambiguous. They start blaming external factors for setbacks, the economy, unfair competition, bad luck, rather than accepting responsibility. The vigorous, fact-based dialogue that characterizes great teams begins to disappear. The story of Iridium is a perfect example. This was Motorola's audacious plan to create a global satellite phone network that would work anywhere on Earth. When the idea was conceived in the 1980s, it was visionary. But by the mid-1990s, when it came time to make the huge bet-the-company investment to actually launch the satellites, the world had changed. Traditional cellular service now covered most of the populated world, erasing much of Iridium's value proposition. The Iridium phones were the size of a brick, expensive, and only worked outdoors. The empirical evidence was mounting against the launch, yet Motorola, fueled by its Stage 2 commitment to grow at all costs, went ahead anyway. They were in denial of the new reality. Iridium launched in 1998. The very next year, it filed for bankruptcy, defaulting on $1.5 billion in loans and costing Motorola dearly. This brings up a crucial point about risk. The greatest danger isn't always in ignoring clear, unassailable facts. It's in misinterpreting ambiguous data, especially when the consequences of being wrong are catastrophic. To illustrate this, the author takes us away from business and into a famous tragedy, the Space Shuttle Challenger disaster. On the night before the scheduled launch in January 1986, engineers were worried. Temperatures were forecast to be far colder than for any previous launch, and they feared the cold could affect the rubber O-rings that sealed the rocket joints. But the data they had was ambiguous and conflicting. In the long, late-night teleconference, a subtle but fatal shift occurred. The question changed from, "Can you prove that it's safe to launch?" to, "Can you prove that it's unsafe to launch?" Since the data was inconclusive, the engineers couldn't prove it was unsafe. So, against their initial recommendations, the decision was made to launch. 73 seconds later, Challenger exploded, killing all 7 crew members. The lesson is what the author calls the waterline principle, a concept from Bill Gore, founder of W.L. Gore and Associates. Imagine your company is a ship. If you make a decision that goes wrong and it blows a hole in the ship above the waterline, you can patch it, learn from it, and sail on. But if you blow a hole below the waterline, you could sink. Companies in Stage 3 start taking risks below the waterline, often based on ambiguous data, because they're in denial of the potential peril. As a company sinks deeper into Stage 3, leadership team dynamics begin to decay. People start shielding those in power from grim facts, afraid of being the messenger who gets shot. Blame becomes the default response to bad news. And we see another telling behavior, obsessive reorganization. When Scott Paper was facing intense competition from Procter & Gamble in the 1970s and 80s, how did they respond? They reorganized. And then they reorganized again. And again. 3 times in 4 years at one point. Moving boxes around on an organizational chart creates the illusion of productive action, but it's often just a form of denial, like rearranging the furniture in your living room when you've just been diagnosed with a serious illness. At this point, the decline is no longer invisible. The cumulative peril of Stage 3 finally asserts itself, and the company is thrown into a sharp downward slide that's visible to everyone. This is the start of Stage 4, grasping for salvation. This is a critical moment. Leadership has a choice. Do they get back to the disciplines that made them great in the first place? Or do they lurch for a quick, silver bullet solution? Those who fall into Stage 4 grasp for a savior. This savior can take many forms. A charismatic, visionary leader from the outside, a bold but untested new strategy, a dramatic cultural revolution, a game-changing acquisition, or any other silver bullet solution that promises a fast, miraculous recovery. The story of Hewlett-Packard in the late 1990s is a textbook case. Under CEO Lou Platt, HP had seen tremendous growth. But by 1999, the company hit a wall. And in the frenzy of the dot-com bubble, HP felt it was falling behind. The board decided it needed a new type of leader, a superstar who could revolutionize the company. So they hired Carly Fiorina, who Fortune had just named the most powerful woman in business. She was exactly what the board thought it wanted, a charismatic, visionary savior who brought glamour and media frenzy with her. She launched a dramatic transformation, unifying the brand under the slogan "Invent" and declaring that leadership is a performance. This was a stark contrast to Lou Gerstner, who was brought in to save a struggling IBM around the same time. When offered a daily progress chart in the media during his first 100 days, Gerstner replied, "No thank you, we're going dark for a bit." His famous first declaration was, "The last thing IBM needs right now is a vision." Gerstner focused first on the fundamentals, getting the right people in place, understanding the brutal facts of the business, and putting the customer back at the center of everything. Fiorina, driven by a sense of urgency, started with a grand vision. The results speak for themselves. Under Gerstner, IBM steadily regained its strength and profitability. Under Fiorina, HP's performance was erratic, culminating in her firing in 2005. The point isn't to blame Fiorina. She was what the board hired her to be. The point is that HP, as an organization, had fallen into stage 4 behavior. It was grasping for a savior, for a quick, revolutionary fix. This is a pattern we see in almost all the fallen companies. Circuit City fired over 3,000 of its most experienced salespeople to cut costs. A panicky move. A&P launched a catastrophic price war, a kamikaze dive that destroyed its profitability. The signature of mediocrity, the author reminds us, is not an unwillingness to change, it is chronic inconsistency. Companies in stage 4 lurch from one program to the next, one savior to the next. When one silver bullet fails, they search for another. And each failed attempt erodes morale and drains resources. Dashed hope follows dashed hope. In this stage, the survival instinct can become your worst enemy. In a moment of panic, like a drowning person flailing in the water, a company can make reactive, lurching moves that only accelerate its demise. The very moment you need calm, deliberate action, you're most at risk of doing the exact opposite. This is what happened to Addressograph, the old office machine company. Faced with the threat from Xerox, they panicked. They launched a crash program releasing 23 new products in 3 years, most of which failed. They lost track of billing. They brought in a visionary CEO who promised a corporate revolution, a massive change in as short a period as possible. The company lurched from one strategy to another, enduring multiple bankruptcies and churning through CEOs until it was just a shadow of its former self. The longer a company stays in stage 4, grasping for one silver bullet after another, the more likely it is to spiral downward into the final stage. The cash runs low. The options narrow. The will to fight begins to fade. This is Stage 5, Capitulation to Irrelevance or Death. Here, the accumulated setbacks and expensive false starts have eroded the company's financial strength and its spirit to such an extent that leaders abandon all hope. There's a powerful lesson the author learned from one of his mentors, Bill Lazier, who used to teach a course on small business. He would walk into class and ask students the central issue in a case study. They would give all sorts of smart-sounding business school answers about strategy or branding. Lazier would keep pressing, until finally a student would say, "Well, they can't make payroll next week, they're going to run out of cash." Lazier would then write one word on the chalkboard in giant letters, cash. Organizations do not die from a lack of earnings, he would say. They die from a lack of cash. In stage 5, the cash is running out. The company has lost the ability to make its own strategic choices. Its decisions are now dictated by short-term survival. At this point, there are really only 2 paths. The first is to give up the fight and sell out. This is what happened to Scott Paper. After years of decline and multiple failed restructurings, the board brought in a notorious CEO known as Chainsaw Al Dunlap. He slashed thousands of jobs and quickly sold the once proud company to its arch-rival, Kimberly-Clark. The second path is to fight on until you simply run out of options and either die outright or shrink into insignificance. This was the long, tragic demise of Zenith. For decades, Zenith was a titan of the radio and television industry. But it fell through the stages. Hubris in ignoring the threat from Japanese competitors, undisciplined expansion, denial in blaming everyone but themselves, and grasping for salvation by jumping into a dozen new businesses at once. Amazingly, they stumbled upon one last chance. A division focused on personal computers, led by a visionary named Jerry Perlman, was becoming incredibly successful. Zenith could have become the next Dell or Compaq. But the old television business was a financial anchor, dragging the whole company down. By the time Perlman tried to sell the TV business, Zenith's cash position had deteriorated so badly that he couldn't get the price he needed. He was out of options. He was forced to sell the successful computer business instead, just to keep the dying company afloat. Zenith limped along for a few more years before falling into bankruptcy and fading into irrelevance. The story of Zenith shows how even the smartest leaders can be trapped when the accumulated weight of the previous stages destroys their financial freedom. By the time a company reaches stage 5, it's often too late. But the key message of the book is that it never has to get that far. The entire journey is a series of choices. And even deep in stage 4, if a company still has enough resources and the right leadership, it can find a way back. It can find well-founded hope. The path to recovery is not found in another silver bullet. It's found in returning to the simple, profound disciplines that build greatness in the first place. It's what Anne Mulcahy did when she took over a nearly bankrupt Xerox in 2001. The company was deep in stage 4, with its debt rated as junk. Mulcahy, a consummate insider, didn't promise a revolution. Instead, she said, "I am the culture," and she worked to bring that culture back to its disciplined roots. She made excruciatingly tough decisions, cutting billions in costs, but she also protected the company's long-term R&D investments. Even in the darkest days, it wasn't glamorous. It was a slow, arduous process of rebuilding, one step at a time. But it worked. Xerox came back from the brink. That is the final, powerful lesson. We are not imprisoned by our circumstances. We are not defined by our mistakes, or even by staggering defeats. The signature of the truly great is not the absence of difficulty. It is the ability to come back, stronger than before. Failure, the author concludes, is not so much a physical state as a state of mind. Success is falling down and getting up one more time, without end. As we step back and reflect on this journey through the 5 stages of decline, it's easy to think these lessons apply only to giant corporations like Motorola or Bank of America. But the true power of this book lies in how universal its framework really is. These 5 stages aren't just a corporate phenomenon, they're a human one. Think about it. Stage 1, Hubris Born of Success. Have you ever aced an exam without much effort and then, feeling invincible, barely studied for the next one, only to be shocked by a bad grade? That's stage 1. It's the subtle pride that makes us believe past success guarantees future results. Stage 2, the undisciplined pursuit of more. This is the student who, after getting good grades, joins 5 different clubs, tries to start a new project, and commits to everything, spreading themselves so thin that their core academic work, their primary flywheel, begins to suffer. It's not complacency, it's overreaching. Stage 3, denial of risk and peril. This is when you start explaining away the bad quiz score as a fluke, blaming the teacher for a tricky question, or telling yourself it's just one grade and nothing is fundamentally wrong. You ignore the warning signs, because facing the brutal fact that your study habits are failing is too uncomfortable. Stage 4, grasping for salvation. The final exam is now just a week away. Panic sets in. Instead of going back to disciplined, steady review work, you grasp for a silver bullet. You pull an all-nighter fueled by energy drinks, hoping a single heroic effort can save the semester. It might produce a brief sense of progress, but it rarely leads to true mastery. And stage 5, capitulation. The final grade comes back, and it's not what you hoped for. You abandon the goal of getting an A in the class, telling yourself it was never that important anyway. This framework is a mirror. It shows us the patterns not just in the boardroom, but in our own lives, in our teams, and in our personal ambitions. The central message is one of profound personal responsibility. Decline is a choice. Arrogance is a choice. Denial is a choice. And so is the path back. So how can you apply these ideas right now? Let me offer a few simple actions. First, conduct a personal audit. Ask yourself honestly, are there any areas in your life, school, a sport, a hobby, where you're showing signs of stage 1? Where has success made you a little too comfortable? Where have you stopped being a humble student and started acting like you have it all figured out? Acknowledging that whisper of hubris is the first step to staying grounded. Second, check for undisciplined pursuit. Look at your commitments. Are you focused on doing a few things with excellence, or are you chasing every shiny new opportunity? Are you honoring your primary flywheel, the core activities that are most important to your long-term goals? Sometimes the most disciplined choice is saying no to good opportunities so you can say yes to great ones. And third, cultivate a habit of confronting the brutal facts. Don't be afraid of the data, even when it's unpleasant. If your grades are slipping, don't explain it away. Look at the numbers. If your team is losing, don't blame the referees. Watch the game tape. Create a personal board of directors, a few trusted friends, mentors, or family members who you can count on to tell you the truth, especially when you don't want to hear it. In the end, this book is a powerful reminder that greatness is not a destination. It's a constant process of renewal. It requires humility, discipline, and the courage to face reality. The world is full of turbulence and uncertainty, but as the author so powerfully concludes, we are not imprisoned by our circumstances. We are freed by our choices. Whether you're leading a nation, a company, or just your own life, the path out of darkness is always there, waiting for those who refuse to capitulate, who get up one more time, and who choose to begin the climb again. That was a summary of How the Mighty Fall by Jim Collins. We've explored the key ideas today, but I have to be honest with you. Listening to a summary is like looking at a travel brochure. It gives you a sense of the destination, but it's no substitute for the journey itself. The real insights often come in the quiet moments of reading, when a particular story or a simple phrase connects with your own experience in a way you didn't expect. This summary is a starting point, a tool to help you decide if this book deserves your time. If anything we've discussed has sparked a question or a moment of self-recognition, I encourage you to grab a copy. Reading it isn't just about learning business theory. It's an opportunity to hold up a mirror to your own journey of growth and ambition. The link to the book is in the description below. And if you found this summary valuable and want to continue exploring the ideas in the world's most influential books, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel. That way, you won't miss our next deep dive into another essential title from the billionaire's bookshelf. Let's keep learning and growing together.